How do you do, fellow kids? Let's hit up the skate park after division class. Adults are so lame, not like us cool youths. Haha, wow, it's so great being a cool kid and not an adult. Adults suck. Adults are feeble. Adults are painfully aware of their own mortality. I'm not those things. I'm still young. I'm a cool youth. Right? 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 Fellow kids? So I'm an animator. Not like a successful one, but it is what I do. I have a bachelor's and a master's in animation, and not to brag, but my Nicola Orsanov animation got like 10,000 likes on TikTok, and people really love that clip I made with Pennywise as a funny little dance. As such, I like to know what's going on in the industry. And one of the most prolific YouTubers who discussed animation back when I was doing my undergrad course was a dude called The Mysterious Mr. Enter. His videos back in 2012 or whenever were super unpolished, and I didn't always agree with what he had to say, but I liked to hear what he had to say nonetheless. Then he started talking about cancel culture all the time, and now I don't like hearing what he has to say. That's not what this video is about, though. This is like flavor. This is just like a little bit of context, you know, for flavor, for video flavor. Anyway, I strongly remember watching his video on Shorty McShorts and being really confused at how much he gravitated towards the short called Flip Flopped. Like, I don't understand what he saw in it exactly. Like, the kids are adults, the adults are kids. And what else? I don't know about you, but I found My Mom Married a Yeti to be a superior piece of entertainment. I mean, one of them has kids talking about business. Boring. And the other one has Bigfoot. Awesome. But, you know, art is subjective. You can like what you like. So when I heard that Mr. Enter was working on his own animated series based on the core concepts introduced in Flip Flopped, I was not gonna lie, I was kind of baffled. But, you know, I have dreams of making my own animation. Solidarity with another creator. I always want to see small-time creators succeed. Maybe growing around wasn't going to be for me, but I was happy that he was pursuing it. That was 2014, and it's 2021 now, and Growing Around never got made. You know what did get made? Growing Around, Party Panic, the novel, and just a fuckload of unproduced scripts. And oh boy, you read them and it's a lot. It's so much. It's a whole lot. So if you aren't already aware, Growing Around is a family sitcom that centers around the Dunn family. Parents Robin and Linda, and children Max, formerly known as Timmy, and Sally. The Dunns live in an alternative reality where kids control everything. They control society, they hold all institutional power, and then the adults are subjugated and just have to go to school forever. Right off the bat, the implications of this are haunting. Enter has taken the premise to Flip Flop, which was just kind of like a dull, boring thing that I don't think could have existed beyond a pilot. And he's made it so much more weird and terrifying. And for that reason alone, I kind of want Growing Around to finally be made, because I'm a little bit obsessed with it. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about the shit show that is Growing Around's production. Daft Painter did a pretty good autopsy of it in his video that he posted a while back. I'm engaging with this concept purely on theme. Because, like a lot of weird, bad media, it reveals a lot about the person who made it. I am a huge fan of bad media. I listen to Tannis. I love garbage. You know this about me. But I'm especially a fan of bad media that, when combined with knowledge of the creator's other work and personal life, creates a fascinating little meta-narrative. Stuff like Onision's novels being a reflection of his own hang-ups and daddy issues and hatred of religion and fat people. Or how Empress Teresa includes all of these sort of, like, nonsensical rants against trolls that are just because Norman Boutin loves to get into fights with people online. Or, you know, the uniquely interesting experience of reading The Disaster Artist and then watching The Room. Art always reveals something about its creator, but in these cases it reveals a lot, more than they probably intended. And Growing Around, when viewed alongside Mr. Enter's YouTube output, creates a very detailed picture of his specific complexes and traumas. Mr. Enter has a prolific backlog of videos, and there are apparently over 70 scripts in existence for Growing Around episodes, out of a planned, like, 150, I think, as well as a novel. So that's a lot of content, and for the purposes of this video, I'm going to only be using a couple of scripts to use as, like, a microcosm, as well as a commentary video retrospective thing that he did on specifically the Growing Around pilot. I might pull in some things from his other videos, but listen, I'm only going to be referring to a few things here. I've got ADHD, and if I go down a rabbit hole, if I don't constantly remind myself what my point is, I'm going to lose it, and I'm never going to find it again. So, the first script that I read is called Movie Madness, or is it Movie Madness or Movie Mayhem? Let me just double check. So the first script that I read on the Mr. Enter wiki, yes, that is a thing, and God bless them for backing up all of the things that he deleted from his DeviantArt account. The first script that I read was called Movie Mayhem. So according to the wiki, this is his attempt at a purely comedic episode, and it is meant to be the third episode chronologically in the series. If it sounds weird that this is going to be purely comedic, given that the show sounds like a kind of goofy family sitcom, Mr. Enter had spoken at length about how he wants this series to be, like, deconstructive and tackle serious issues. I will speak more on this fact later. Movie Mayhem opens on the Dunn family eating breakfast. For some reason, it's specified that Timmy Max is eating cereal. Who knows what everyone else is eating? I guess it doesn't matter. While watching the morning news, they see an ad for a new movie called Captain Commando, and Robert gets really hyped because he loved Captain Commando as a kid and he really wants to see the movie, and he asks Sally for permission to see it. Sally says no because the film is rated for kids only. There is a joke about adult fans of Star Wars in there, and I just can't quite find it. Secondly, if kids hold all of the jobs, how are there movies for adults? Who makes the porn in this universe? I'm fucking terrified. So the plot of the episode centers around Robert's attempt to sneak out and go see the movie, even though Sally has forbidden it. And as you can probably tell, Robert is kind of the more childish of the two parents, with Linda being the one who is more often in conflict with Sally because of her more mature and realistic outlook. But regardless, both parents are, like all adults in this universe, treated like garbage, and the text more often than not portrays this as good and correct. You see more of this in the pilot, which I read after I read Movie Mayhem, and I will discuss this fact later. Side note, I don't understand how anyone matures normally in the Growing Around universe. Like, surely if this was a world where it, like, all runs on kid logic and the kids created everything and like, childishness is prioritized, you would stay childish even as you aged. Like, in real life, there's no flipped switch when you turn 18 that's just suddenly like, boom, now I love romance movies and sensible pencil skirts. You've either always had those interests, or you get peer pressured into having them in your 20s by all of your friends who you consider to be more mature and put together than yourself. Linda at one point asks Sally where she learned how to drive. And Sally explains that you don't learn how to drive. It's like walking and talking. You just kind of figure it out on your own. And if that's how that works in this universe, how does Linda not know that? Did she forget? Do you forget how to drive when you become an adult? So you might have noticed a theme here. The world building is truly atrocious. It's nonsensical. Dog shit, even. And yet, this world is somehow so compelling to Mr. Enter that he has written 75 out of 100-something scripts and a novel. Keep in mind, when I say scripts, I'm not talking shorts. These things average around 22 to 26 minutes in his own estimation. In his words, he cannot write anything short. His animators had suggested to him that he write a minute-long script to use as a proof of concept, and while I think he did end up doing that, his response was, asking a writer to write less than a minute of story is like asking an artist to draw a stick figure, which we don't have time to go into why that's wrong. In Enter's mind, this world and characters are so important and rich that they need quick maths. 1,650 minutes of content to fully encapsulate them. Yet, to the rest of us, it's a bunch of nonsense. Why? Because, like I said, people write their own hang-ups into their work. And Mr. Enter is someone who is, to an extent, I think, mourning the loss of his childhood. Not in, like, a peaked in high school sort of way, more in the sense that you can tell that he had a pretty rough go of it in his youth, and he wishes that he could go back and do it again, knowing what he does now. I'm not saying this based on nothing. He has spoken a lot about his experiences in childhood, and you can tell from watching most of his animated atrocities videos that he has a particular and very personal hatred of the bumbling dad character archetype.
This cliché has been beaten to a pulp, buried into the ground, grown into a poison oak tree, been cut down, and burnt into toxic fumes.
And there's also a very very telling part in his Max's Many Birthday commentary video where he talks about morals in kids' shows and how he intends to deconstruct them in Growing Around.
You have to deal with this bully yourself. The adults are not an option here.
This clip really paints a dark picture of someone who isn't used to having other people stick up for him, not as a child, and hell, not as an adult either. I certainly empathize with his situation. I had my own struggles when I was growing up, and I was pretty harshly bullied when I was younger. And using art as a way to cope is a very natural human instinct. But before you go and feel too sorry for Mr. Enter, let's briefly address the pilot. So strap in, my esteemed gay boys, because this is going to be a trip and a half. The pilot opens with Robert and Sally playing video games. It's all well and fine until you get to the part where Sally trips on one of Linda's rollerblades. Linda profusely apologizes, and then Sally says, "You know you shouldn't have left your rollerblade here. Now you have to sniff it." Pardon? It only gets worse from there, as over the course of the episode it is made abundantly clear that Linda lives in constant fear of her abusive 8-year-old child overlord. The pilot of this episode involves Linda and Robert both failing at school, and Sally deciding that they get to choose each other's punishments. And I hate this. This is very bad. Reading this shit just feels icky. Feels unclean. It's like when you're a kid going around to someone's house and having to listen to them get yelled at by their parents. That's what this feels like. Which leads me to the next thing that I can infer about Mr. Enter's life through this script. He is full of hate. I mean, I already knew that this man was full of hate because of his other content.
The only reason the show wasn't on my worst of 2000s list is because I barely considered a show. These three do not deserve to have jobs. They deserve to be fired immediately and blacklisted. Wow, no really. You couldn't make exposition more obvious and more stupid.
That and he stopped making admirable animations because he didn't enjoy it enough. He didn't enjoy enjoying things. I get the impression that he's a very cynical person and he has a lot of feelings, but they're not the good ones. And when reading over the pilot of Growing Around, the parental issues really jump out. This goes double from what I've heard for the novel.
So, she spends all this time thinking about how she's gonna torture her fucking mom and, how great her dad, Rob is her dad, she calls him Robbie. And she spends, all this time just being this, cruel dictator.
Planning ways to make Linda do embarrassing, humiliating
and
shit
feel like
that
shit.
she understands is embarrassing and humiliating to her.
Enter is taking his chance to go back and do his childhood again, but this time, he's got all the power, he's the one in control, kids rule, parents rule, this is my world, you can go choke on it, Dad! The thing is, I don't think that this is what makes Growing Around a complete failure of an idea. Like I said, spinning your trauma into art is a natural human instinct. It's healthy, it's cathartic, and it's creatively fulfilling. With the right changes, Growing Around could be a really powerful and unsettling, deconstructive, Twilight Zone-esque speculative horror about the cycles of abuse and the failures of the way that we raise our children. The problem is, Mr. Enter doesn't know this. He refuses to acknowledge the possibility of this fact. He's in fact very, very dismissive of any criticism of the premise at all.
I owe literally zero explanation to my premise. That is the definition of a premise in fiction. If you have any questions about my world and how it works, and you absolutely demand to know what it is if you think it's going to be important to enjoying the show, the one answer you're going to get is read the scripts. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. I don't think that I'm overreacting in my annoyance when people said, and I quote, that I have to, it's not optional, it's something that I have to explain how pedophiles work. I got this a lot. So this is a world in which at some point younger people are just going to replace you at your work, and society is basically just going to boot you to the side. That sounds like a horrifying world. And I'm like, open your eyes, dumbass. You live in that world already.
We live in a society.
My favorite piece of criticism was people saying that they'd kill themselves if they lived in the world of Growing Around.
He compares the universe of Growing Around to other blatantly dystopian settings like A Quiet Place, and somehow it doesn't register to him that maybe this is a failing of the premise, and maybe this shouldn't be for kids. Not just on the premise and the setting alone, but on tone and theme. Enter says in the commentary video that he wants to deconstruct the morals of other shows, and the ways that he's describing this come off as, super cynical. Which is, all well and good for a show that's aimed at teenagers or adults, but that's not good for kids, and it's not healthy either. Don't take this as me saying that kids cannot handle any kind of cynicism. They can. My favorite book series growing up was A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is just about as cynical as you can get for children's media. But those books still had really strong moral lessons to them at the end. Nobody's perfect, not even your parents. Violence is wrong, but sometimes unavoidable. And being able to think for yourself is the most important quality that you can cultivate. These are good lessons that I took with me to adulthood. And, despite the cynicism of the subject matter, the morals still were clearly defined. Which is, what kids need. Contrast that to the morals that Mr. Enter wants to put across in Growing Around, which are just very mean-spirited.
Number 1, if you want to beat a bully, you do have to stand up to them, and it's not going to be easy. You will be worse for the wear as you go about it. Number 2, popularity is actually important. It is important to what other people think of you. The popular people are the ones who tend to influence society and create the systems that control our lives.
He describes feeling stressed out by cartoons that dealt with growing older as a kid.
The message of that episode was that adulthood sucked. You'd have the happiest life possible if you got hit by a bus on your way home from your high school graduation. I'm exaggerating, slightly. Cartoons that did this made me mad. Well, no, they made me paranoid.
And he doesn't want Growing Around to be like that, and hey, can I tell you something? Hey, John, can I tell you something? It will be, and actually it'll be worse. Mr. Enter's Growing Around is an exercise in existentialism, completely by accident. It's an okay premise, hampered by truly nightmarish world building, and a creator who is so caught up in his own personal feelings that he cannot take criticism. The premise of Growing Around could be harrowing in, a good way, if the horrible implications of it were explored, and if the show was pitched to a more mature audience. But at the end of the day, that's never going to happen. Mr. Enter doesn't want it to happen. Like a lot of mediocre writers, he has a vision. It's a messy, ill-conceived, personal vision that lays bare all of his baggage, and he thinks it's going to be good, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And I kind of hope that he does get Growing Around off the ground someday, just so he can finally exercise whatever demon possessed him to make it in the first place.